Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine.
Victoria, we're thrilled to welcome you to our Education Corner podcast and to be able to speak to you a little bit about your work and career to date. Victoria was the second person from her school ever to get into Cambridge. During your time studying there, you served as the BAME officer for your college and you went on to win prestigious awards, including the Outstanding Achievement Award at the House of Lords for the UK Student Social Mobility. And you were also selected as the Powerful Media's Top 100 Future Leaders. Since that, you've gone on to be a global winner of the McKinsey & Company Achievement Award. You're the first to chair the Career Ready Youth Advisory Board, and you're also one of the members of the Sutton Trust Alumni Advisory Board, working closely with the Trust to advise on their social mobility work, which is something at Education Choices we're very keen to highlight and raise awareness on. It's a real pleasure to have you. To start with, we're particularly interested in the work you've done with the Sutton Trust Alumni Advisory Board. Could you tell us a little bit more about what this involves and some of the things that you've done?
Hi, Chloe. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Yeah, so I came across the Sutton Trust by, pure randomness. I came across them when I was Googling free charities and free opportunities when I was in year 12. So almost like this time a few years ago, so October, November time. And so I just came across them on Google and I realized that they had the Sutton Trust Summer School program, which is a program that they run with different universities across the UK. So Cambridge, Durham, for example, and students in year 12 can basically have an insight into life at university through taster lectures. So that's pretty much how I got involved with Sutton Trust. I did a summer school there. So I did a summer school at Cambridge at Queen's College doing geography, and that was in 2016. And then 5 years later, I graduated from Queen's College doing geography from Cambridge. So it was very impactful charity in my journey to university. That's pretty much why I decided to get involved with the Alumni Advisory Board. So I applied to be part of the board. And what we do as alumni is we kind of work with the charity to ensure that the young people they are fundamentally serving, we kind of add that youth voice to what we're doing. So, for example, if there's any research that they're about to publish and they want a second look over from a young person perspective, we help them with that. Also, if they're looking for any of us to speak about our journeys in the press or at different conferences. So through the Sutton Trust, I spoke at the Forage Global International Conference. And this is basically a really big conference that people from across the world can attend. And the topic was about education, access to work opportunities. And so I got to share my journey with two other alumni. And that was an opportunity provided by the Sutton Trust. So there's also a variety of public speaking opportunities. And then also as a group, we can kind of decide on the next steps. So the previous alumni board, they actually started the Alumni Festival, which is a festival where you can bring together alumni from the program, but then also equip them with different personal development skills, training, networking opportunities, but then also an insight into different careers beyond, banking, law, the creative industry as well. So they do a lot. And I think I'm very glad that I'm able to be part of the board with the Sutton Trust, but then also chair the Career Ready Youth Advisory Board as well, because I think it's so important to kind of have that Gen Z youth voice, especially when you're working to serve young people ultimately.
How particularly do you feel that they helped you with your application to Cambridge?
Yeah, so I think because I did the summer school, it meant that I basically got to see whether or not Cambridge was for me. And, you live in the halls, you go to the lecture, you're sitting in the same lecture hall that students actually would sit in. And it allowed me to kind of imagine myself at that university and then see whether or not I'd want to apply. So it definitely gave me the confidence. But I think beyond the Sutton Trust, there was also a variety of other organisations that played a big role in my personal development during my teen years and also, early 20s. So Career Ready, Into University, Target Oxbridge and SEO London, for example. These are also social mobility charities that work with young people from less advantaged backgrounds. We've given them access, not just to applying to university, but then also access to apprenticeships, knowledge about different careers, internship experiences. So they do really, really impactful work. And I think for a lot of the young people they work with, I don't necessarily think that the caliber of opportunities they will get access to will be the same if they didn't have access to the charities. So I think they do really, really great work as well.
How did you find out about the charities?
So I came across Sutton Trust through Google. Like I mentioned earlier, I also came across Tug Oxbridge through Google as well. Other search engines do exist. But yeah, just through Google research, I actually came across Into University through Sutton Trust. So once you finish the program, they sent us an email saying that there's a charity that can provide you with Oxbridge interview practice. And so that's how I came across Into University. Career Ready was done through my school, so I applied for the program on my school. And then when I got to university, I came across another organisation who do amazing work called Upreach. And so Upreach are the ones who run the Student Social Mobility Awards. And so I came across Upreach through LinkedIn, actually. So someone posted about them when I was in my first year of university. So then I decided to apply to be part of their program. So a lot of proactivity and doing my own personal research.
Quite driven as an individual, obviously. In an article, you mentioned a brilliant quote by Marian Wright Endelman, the African-American writer, who says, "You can't be what you can't see." Do you feel that you're beginning to see more people from more challenging socioeconomic backgrounds in esteemed universities such as Cambridge?
Yeah, I think compared to, 20 years ago, definitely. Compared to 10 years ago, definitely as well. I think the university and also its colleges basically have done a lot of work over the last 5 to 10 years when it comes to widening participation. I recently got involved with a social media campaign with Cambridge, and I was able to kind of just share my journey. And yeah, I think in my opinion, obviously, there's so much more that could be done, but I think it's also extremely important to recognize the progress that has been made and use that confidence going forward to kind of ensure more change is also brought about. So I think to answer your question, I would say yes. But even when I got to university, I was quite surprised by how many more students were. I kind of thought I was going to be like one of 10 people, but it was a lot more diverse than I thought it was. Obviously, it's not the most diverse place. That being said, it was more diverse than I thought it would ever be. And again, like I mentioned earlier, nuance is so important. It's so important to kind of realize, yes, more change can be made, but I think it's also important to recognize the work that the university has done. But then beyond that, it's also important to recognize the work that students have done. There's so many different student organizations that I got involved with. There's a lot of grassroots activism, grassroots work that young people are doing at university alongside their degree to ensure that Cambridge is of a welcoming place. So whether that's, networks like Fly, which was set up by 3 amazing women a few years ago, and they've actually got a book out called Fly Girls of Cambridge. And whether it's Ore and Chelsea, who were the president and vice president of the Cambridge African Caribbean Society, they did a lot of work when it came to access, especially for students from an African Caribbean background as well. So I think it's also really important to acknowledge young people, students who have been putting in the work to ensure that change. And that's kind of what inspired me as well to kind of get involved with it. I knew how impactful it was to see people who were from a similar background to myself also occupying different spaces. So then that's kind of how I got involved with doing my public speaking. So speaking at different schools across the country, sharing my journey. I became a student ambassador for the university. So I'll speak at different summer schools and different events where state school students will come to Cambridge. And I think there was a lot of power in sharing your journey, especially your authentic journey, because you never know who you're inspiring along the way.
I think it's wonderful as well that there's such a network. It makes such a difference. And as you say, I think young people will listen to other young people perhaps sometimes more because they can relate. How was your experience studying at Cambridge? How did you find it?
Overall, I think it was a good experience. I'm glad I went there. So I studied geography. So the course was really interesting. I met really amazing academics. I am happy that I went to Queen's as well. The people I met, from the porters who were, their receptionists, all the way up to different academics I met, and, the director of studies I had as well. So I think overall it was a really interesting, good experience. And the fact that I was able to kind of get involved with work around, accessing education, work opportunities, it definitely allowed me to kind of build my passion. Beyond that as well, I kind of got involved with new things. So when I went to university, I learned how to DJ. I didn't think I'd ever go to Cambridge and learn how to DJ, but I did. And I really, really love music. And yeah, it's kind of like a new thing that I managed to pick up at university. So yeah, Cambridge, this is beyond Cambridge, but just, university in general, or just, going through your youth, as it were, you are going to be exposed to new different opportunities. So I think it's so important to have an open mind and be very open with regards to meeting people and try not to have too many preconceived notions of what people might be like or what certain activities might be like, because I think a lot of life, or the exciting part of life, really exists on the opposite side of your comfort zone.
Do you feel that there are ways that universities could raise more awareness of the different networks and facilities of support that are in place? I mean, you've obviously done a lot of research yourself and kind of reached out to many different charities and forged different connections. But what do you feel could be done to further support children from perhaps disadvantaged backgrounds to have a more diverse and inclusive culture?
Yeah, so I think visibility is definitely one thing. So I worked as a consultant for a university. So I'm on a gap here for some context for the listeners. So I worked as a consultant for a university and I was helping them with creating their very first widened participation scheme. And so that was a really interesting experience because I think a lot of it is to do with if you're having a program, for example, how visible is the program? If you know you want to target students from a certain background, how can you make sure you're getting into those spaces? Are you perhaps advertising it to certain schools that may not necessarily have your target demographic? If you need to go to schools on a more wider basis, are you trying to, reach them? Are you trying to, get those students to apply? So I think a lot of it takes a lot of, research, doing your research, being very particular with regards to the students you want to work with, but then also fundamentally giving them a voice. I think it's really important to kind of have young people from the background that you're trying to work with and perhaps like having alumni or older students and ask them, when you were this age, when you were 14, 15, 16, what did you want to see? And I think once you have that understanding, it therefore makes it a lot more easier. But beyond that as well, I think social media can be very, very powerful. So like I mentioned, I worked on a social media campaign with Cambridge. And I think, not to generalize all of young people, but, quite a considerable amount of them are, on social media. So whether that's on TikTok, on YouTube, on Snapchat, for example. So I think it's really important to think about how do you, as an organization or university or an institution, how do you harness social media to ensure that you're engaging with the young people that you're trying to serve? But beyond that as well, I think it's also giving, like I mentioned, the grassroots student activists or advocates the platform. So highlighting their work. So I know that there was I think in my first year, second year of university, the University of Cambridge, they had a very short series where they basically interviewed or showcased different student societies. So that was like the African Caribbean Society. It was the Hip Hop Society, just different societies that, on the surface, you might not think it exists in Cambridge unless you know about it. So I think it's really important to kind of give a voice to different organizations. But visibility is so important, harnessing social media for good.
That's a very good point. You said that taking a gap year was one of the best decisions you have ever made. And I think we talked about it just before the interview started. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing and why you feel it was such a great decision?
Yeah, so this is technically my second gap year. So my gap year post-university. I like my first one so much that I decided to do another one. So I guess this is gap year season 2. So I think for me, it was definitely one of the best decisions because I had so many different access to opportunities I didn't even know existed. So for some context, like you mentioned in my intro, I was the second person from my school to go to Cambridge. But on my gap year, when I was interning at a consulting firm or a charity, because I was broadening my network, and yes, I might have been the youngest person in the room, but it meant that all of a sudden, my colleagues might have gone to Cambridge, or their husband might have gone to Cambridge, or their younger sibling might have gone to Cambridge. So when I started university, yes, I was the only person from my, school who had gone and who was in my year group. But the network I was able to build during my gap year meant that I felt a lot more equipped with regards to what to expect from the university, from the social side. Beyond that as well, I was able to go to California in the summer of my gap year, which I really loved. And that was a great opportunity to speak with different artists in the area, just really explore a new country. And I actually recently went to America on an exchange program with the US Department of State and the US Embassy. And so that was really amazing. And I actually was in America this summer. And then when I got the notification when I landed in DC, it was 4 years ago that I was in California. So a very nice full circle moment. But I think one of the biggest things that, when I thought about doing a gap year for the first time, I was in year 13, so the start of year 13. I think gap years have a certain, maybe not as much as before. So maybe not as much as 2016, 2015 when I was in sixth form, but there was a certain idea of, only certain kinds of students do gap years. Students who might have parents who can fund them to go to Thailand for a year. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that because use your parents' money, why not? But I think for a lot of students who might not have that background, it might feel like a off-putting opportunity. But I think there's so much that can be gained from doing a gap year. You can write a speculative application and start looking for internships in your local area. You could do volunteering abroad. You can start up a new hobby. You can start up a new business. And actually on LinkedIn, a student reached out to me and she's in year 13. about doing a gap year. And I do post about my gap year quite a lot on social media. So I'm writing articles. And yeah, she reached out to me and she was saying, thank you so much for inspiring me, because I was on the fence about doing a gap year, but now I know that it can be so helpful to do. So I think if you are getting any stigma about doing a gap year, just make sure you have a plan around what you want to do and like kind of keep pushing forward with what you would like to do fundamentally in life, because at the end of the day, you know, when you're older, you're going to only look back at the regrets you had. So if there's anything you want to do that might be different, it takes a lot of confidence to go off the beaten path, but your older self would be a lot more grateful that you did that. And so, yeah, taking a gap year definitely was really, really impactful for my personal development as well.
And probably you've learned a lot about yourself through kind of doing things that were outside the boundaries of what you would have expected. Do you feel that schools could perhaps work harder to be more encouraging towards their students with their university applications, perhaps supporting children's ambitions instead of promoting the idea that a student has to have perfect grades in order to apply to esteemed universities?
I think it's quite important to be very holistic. One of the biggest things that whenever I speak in schools or I do a lot of mentoring, so I've mentored about 40 students to get into Roscoe universities and about 15 to get into Oxbridge. And whenever I mentor them, I always tell them it's so important to think about your life and this university application holistically. Yes, grades are very, very important. That being said, you want to come across as someone who is interesting, but then also interested. And I think you gain so much in life beyond the lecture hall, beyond the school classroom. So I think it's really important to ensure that students are well equipped to be fantastic global citizens. But a lot of that does take place beyond the school gates. So I think it's so important to encourage young people to, you know, have access to different opportunities. So for example, when I was in school, through the school I went to, the Jack Petchy Foundation was a great charity that helped me a lot with my personal development. So through them, when I was 16 years old, I got to speak in front of 2,000 people. And that was a few weeks before my GCSE exams. Being 16, speaking in front of 2,000 people, being very unfazed, gave me so much confidence. That's kind of why I'm, you know, as people would say, like a good public speaker, because of what I was doing when I was a teenager. So I think there's a lot to be said about the skills you gain beyond school, you know, beyond the classroom, beyond, you know, learning about Pythagoras' theorem. These are all still important, of course, but I think it's so important to kind of encourage young people to ensure that they're picking up different hobbies. Are you playing a musical instrument? You know, are you doing sports? Are you getting involved with social activism in your local community? Maybe that might be a lot of littering that's happening in your school. Do you want to try and sort that out? You know, it really teaches young people to have really important skills that are going to help them, the communication skills, the ability to negotiate effectively, the ability to communicate with people from across different backgrounds. And I think if I didn't get involved with things beyond my grades, doing more than just beyond my grades, I don't think I would be the kind of resilient, tenacious person I am today. So I think it's really, really important. And of course, you know, in the grand scheme of things, there's obviously a lot of issues around, you know, funding and access to opportunities. So a lot can be kind of discussed around that. But I think to answer your question, I definitely think it's really important to kind of encourage young people to think just beyond grades.
I know that you're such an active person. I'm going to be showered with things. But are there future projects in the up and coming months that you'd like to just tell us a little bit about that you're working on?
Yeah, so I think when I was in America, like I mentioned, one of the kind of takeaways I took from speaking with young people in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, and then also in Washington, D.C., and then Florida as well, and in Detroit, was the power of a message, like having a really strong message. And this year on my gap year, I also interned in public relations and I also interned at a social media agency. And these experiences were all really impactful because it really told me the importance of storytelling. So I guess going forward, I'm thinking a lot about, you know, how can I go about sharing my journey, utilizing social media perhaps, because it can be really impactful. And there is a lot of research about how social media is unfortunately sometimes negative for young people who they might follow. But I think it's really important to ensure that you're cultivating your social media feed to be inspired by the people you're following, not to feel, you know, down about how you look because you're comparing yourself. So I think I want to find a way to share my voice through social media because a lot of people have encouraged me to do it and I just haven't really gotten round to it. So I think that's a project I'm trying to focus on. Yeah.
We actually interviewed Marvin Harrison. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he does a lot of work with Date Black Dads and he's now running the Beloved Agency, doing a lot of work on EDI. And funnily enough, he also has written a book that is all about self-image for children. I Love Me, for similar reasons, kind of to make sure that people are trying to think about how they're perceived and what we say and how it can impact people. What are your hopes for the future in terms of EDI within the education sector?
So I think for me, I guess hopes for the future, just like the continued integration of young people's voices. So if you're working with young people, or if you're working with a marginalized community, just ensuring that that voice is integrated into the work and the practice that you have, because fundamentally that's the community you're serving. So I think that's definitely like an area that I think would be really useful going forward, like having that continued focus. Beyond that as well, I think will be really interesting basically to continue strengthening the bonds between business and society, also the gap between schools and employers. Because when I speak in schools and I kind of tell students about, maybe LinkedIn, or I tell students about, oh, by the way, I just spoke to this person and, they just gave me an internship and it was really easy. A lot of the students are just very shocked. So I think there's still a lot to be done around schools and how do we equip young people for the next stage of their life. So whether that's them doing an apprenticeship, going straight into work, wanting to start their own business, wanting to go to university, whatever they want to do, just making sure they're very prepared for it. Because unfortunately, a lot of the schools I have spoken at, I think a lot of the students just don't necessarily feel like they're being equipped with that knowledge. And I think when I do come in and speak, they see it as just very like life-changing and transformational. So I guess that's a good thing for me, but then also like a bad thing knowing that there is still this massive gap. Hence why I think I want to find a way to kind of focus on that social media aspect. And I think as well, seeing how you can use social media, especially if you're an organization that works with young people or tries to serve young people, how can you use social media to kind of harness that interest?
Do you have any final words of advice for the younger listeners, possibly those hoping to apply to Oxbridge or thinking about university?
I probably have three main pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is to get support. So I mentioned a variety of charities. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, my Instagram as well. I think Chloe will put it in the description. But I do post different organizations that exist that, so many young people just don't know exist. So definitely go and get support from these organizations. There's a lot of free advice out there that can help you on your journey, doing research on, YouTube, on Google, and just finding support. So fundamentally, the first tip is to find support. The second tip is to not suffer in silence, which is also related to the first piece of advice. So don't suffer in silence. If you need help with anything you're struggling with in school, it's really important to go and get that assistance, even though it might be really difficult and tough at the time. And the third thing I would say is comparison is a thief of joy. It's very easy, especially as a young person, to compare adults do it too. Everyone does it. It's very easy to compare your life to the life of other people. But for me, I found that my life has flourished when I focused on my own journey, focused on my own personal development journey, and I kind of what kind of life do I want to craft for myself. So yes, you can take inspiration from other people, but also fundamentally focus on what you want to get out of life. And once you have that good, strong understanding, it means that when you might want to do a gap year, or if you want to do a subject that seems a bit rogue for people like you'll do it with confidence because you know what you're doing, because you trusted your intuition. So I think that's my three pieces of advice. But you can also follow me if you want more tips. I do post them as well.
We'll be adding links to your LinkedIn at the bottom of the article. Thank you so much, Victoria. You are such an inspiring young person to speak to. And I'm sure listening to you will be very uplifting and encouraging to so many young people. Thank you for giving up your time to speak to us.
Thank you.